Okay, so we're going to talk now about labor. And this lecture is going to have really two parts. We're going to start with the process of labor and how labor works, the physiology, and then we're going to move on to the care that we give patients in labor. So this recording or this set of recordings is going to be fairly lengthy. There's probably going to be 20 or more short recordings. So there's more time in this. And I really want you to watch these before you come to class on the day, because it'll help as we work through the things we're going to do in class. So first, we're going to start with the process of labor. And the very first thing I want to do is look at full-term pregnancy and the fetus in relationship to maternal body parts. So you may have one of these models on your campus. Okay. So we have the fetus. This fetus is in anterior position. We're going to talk about positions in a bit, but it's in a pretty ideal position for delivery. You can see the fetus in the uterus. Here's the placenta. You can see the cervix, and this little white is meant to represent the mucus plug. When the cervix begins to dilate, that mucus plug will come out. Here's the vagina. You can see the urethra and bladder here, pretty squished. You can see the anus, the rectum here. You have the maternal spine, symphysis pubis up here. So you can see where the fetus is in relation. You can also imagine the fetus in different positions, but we have a small model we're going to use to look at that. Okay, so just so you have an idea. Sorry, our baby fell. We're going to use this model and the tiny model to look at some different positions. Okay, so there are factors that affect labor. That's the first thing we need to discuss. And traditionally, we talk about the 5 P's or the 4 P's. Sorry, there actually is a 5th P that's been added later, but we talk about the 4 P's. Passenger, passage, powers, and position. Okay, and then we also talk about psyche as the 5th P. So we're going to start with passenger. When we look at the fetus, we have the head and we have the shoulders, and the widest diameter is actually the shoulders. If you see our larger fetal model, the widest diameter is the shoulders. But the shoulders can shift position so that one shoulder is born at a time. So the widest diameter that usually has to deliver at once is going to be the fetal head. And that's going to depend how wide that diameter is. It's going to depend on the position of that head. Okay. So we look at the fetal head, we have to get that out. The shoulders don't deliver at the same time. So even though that's a wider diameter, they don't deliver at the same time. Okay. If both shoulders try to deliver together after the head has delivered, then we have what's called shoulder dystocia. And I'm going to show you that with the smaller model. We have our baby, we have a pelvis. So the head delivers, the shoulders can deliver one at a time. But if both of these shoulders try to come through at the same time, we're stuck. That's called shoulder dystocia. Okay. We talk about the fetus in terms of presentation. We talk about presentation and we talk about position. First of all, presentation is what part of the fetus is coming through the pelvis first. So we have a pelvis. Okay, you can see our pelvis. This is anterior, posterior. Here's the spine. Okay, and we have our fetus. If the head is coming first, then this is a cephalic presentation. If the bottom of the feet are coming first, either feet or bottom, that is a breech presentation. A shoulder or transverse presentation is trying to come sideways. Okay. Now, cephalic presentation is preferred because we get the widest diameter that has to come out first, so we're sure that the cervix dilates enough and that it fits through the pelvis. And then the rest of the baby delivers, the shoulders and then the rest of the baby. Breech delivery has increased risk. There is a risk. Bottoms and feet are a lot smaller and squishier. So there's a risk that we get the baby delivered, the cervix closes around the head or around the neck, and they have a difficult time getting the baby delivered from there. Okay, that's one of the risks. There's also a risk if the baby is delivering breech in a posterior position that the chin can get caught on the pelvis and be difficult to deliver. So breech is riskier. There are a lot of places where breech births are screened for risk factors and are delivered vaginally with appropriate attendance. Okay, so there are places where that happens. In the US, a lot of the time breech births are by cesarean because of the increased risk. There is also increased risk with C-section, so it tends to be a matter of balancing that risk or which risk is the greater, and sometimes that's a judgment call. So we're going to talk about types of breech presentations. Okay, here's our pelvis. Frank breech, we're going to put the baby here. Okay, so the baby's going down at the pelvis. Frank breech, both legs are bent at the hip and straight at the knee. Okay, so bottom first, feet up around the ears. Feet are up near the head. Complete breech, and this baby won't do it because the knees won't bend. Flexed at the hip, also flexed at the knee. So imagine these feet flexed at the knee as well. So they're kind of in a seated position. Footling breech, either one or both feet are coming first. Okay. Shoulder or transverse, this is not fitting, right? We're not going to fit through here. Okay. So we've talked about presentation, and I don't want you to confuse presentation and position. We're going to talk about that in just a minute. We also talk about fetal lie. Fetal lie is the orientation of the fetus with the maternal spine. So here is our spine, okay? If the fetal spine is lined up with the maternal spine, let's try this way, it's easier this way. The fetal spine, the maternal spine, if those are lined up parallel, that's considered a vertical lie. So that can be either cephalic or breech, okay? If the fetal spine is perpendicular to the maternal spine, that's a horizontal lie. That would also be called a shoulder or transverse presentation. It might be a transverse presentation. It might be shoulder is more likely to be oblique, but if it's perpendicular, this is not possible to deliver. So perpendicular is going to be a transverse presentation. Okay, that's a horizontal lie. Oblique lie is if it's at a diagonal, usually it goes one way or the other. It may start out oblique and then it may turn vertical or horizontal. So it may turn, okay, either head, or we could go oblique and go this way, but usually it's going to turn either vertical or horizontal. Okay, oblique, it's at a diagonal. It can be a diagonal this way or this way. Babies cannot come out at a diagonal, and they cannot come out if they're horizontal. Okay, if they're diagonal, usually that's going to change to either horizontal or vertical. Fetal attitude is whether the fetus is flexed or extended. Flexion is more common. Our big baby is very flexed. You can see arms, shoulders, elbows flexed, hips, knees flexed, all neck is flexed. The neck flexion is important because if this neck is extended, it makes a wider diameter to get through the pelvis, and also it'll continue to extend in delivery at times. So let's look at it with our little tiny model baby. This is fetal attitude. Are we flexed? Let's look at the head on this one. Are we flexed or are we extended? Okay, that's going to affect the ability to get through the pelvis. Fetal position is the relationship of the presenting part to the maternal pelvis. So fetal presentation is what part is coming first. Okay, fetal position is how is that part in relation to the maternal pelvis. So we designate that by 3 letters. R or L is based on which side of the maternal pelvis the presenting part is pointing to or is in, okay? So, and that's going to be the mother's right or left. So R, L, okay? The middle letter stands for the specific presenting part, which we're going to talk about in a minute. The third letter describes whether that presenting part is oriented to the front or the back, anterior, posterior. So let's have an example. Okay. We're going to talk about station in just a minute. All right. So in a cephalic presentation, we really want the occiput to present because it's the narrowest diameter. And if this head is really well flexed, then this is the part of the head that's coming first. So that's the occiput. All right. Right there at the tip top back of that baby's head, occiput. All right. Now, baby in the pelvis, anterior, posterior. This is the front of the mom, the back of the mom. Here's the mom's spine. All right. If I put the baby in here, so if the baby's positioned here, we're talking about the occiput. Where is the occiput pointed? Toward the left side, L, O for occiput. Now, is it pointed toward the anterior or posterior pelvis? It's really easy to get confused and think about where the baby is facing. Is the baby facing anterior or posterior? But what we're talking about is where this part of the head is facing, and it's facing anterior. So this is LOA, left occiput in right occiput anterior. This is LOA. Okay. It's really easy to, I'm looking at the screen, so I'm going backwards. So right occiput anterior. Now, what about this? Right occiput posterior. Now, we can also have the occiput in the transverse, where it's like right in the middle. It's not pointing toward the front or the back. That would be occiput transverse. All right. So we're going to talk in a minute about what all of the names, the Latin names for all of those potential presenting parts are. But recap, which side of the mother's pelvis is it on? Right, left? Is it anterior or posterior? Okay. And then we're talking about the presenting part, not the baby's face. Okay, one last thing I want to talk about before we move on to what those specific presenting parts are called is station. If you look inside this pelvis, you can see these little projections, these little pointy projections. All right. You can see them a little bit from here. You can see them better from either above or below. That's the ischial spines. And we also talk, when we talk about station, we want to know, where is this fetus? Where's the presenting part in relationship to those ischial spines? Okay. So my finger's on the ischial spines. That's where the baby is. That's where the presenting part is. That's 0 station. Backwards, it's minuses. Forward is pluses. So 1 centimeter above that is going to be -1. 2 centimeters above is -2. 1 centimeter below is going to be +1, +2, etc. Okay. So those ischial spines is how we estimate station, where the baby is in relation to that pelvis. All right. Engagement is when the largest diameter of the presenting part is at 0 station. So if you hear the term engagement, what we mean is the largest diameter that's going to have to go through is at 0 station. That means it's going to fit between those ischial spines. Now, let's talk about those presentations. When we're looking at presentations, remember, we're looking at where the presenting part is pointing. So we really like occiput because that makes a smaller circle to have to go through, smaller diameter. If it's flexed but not quite as much, we might get the vertex. which is in between the anterior and posterior fontanelles on the baby's head. And neither one of these models have fontanelles modeled in. This model does. It may be difficult to see. You can see the anterior fontanelle. Okay. That's a cervical model we're going to look at in a bit. So the space between the anterior and posterior fontanelles. The anterior fontanelle is usually right here on top. It's a larger, is that the, no, that's the posterior there. Okay, sorry. It's a larger diamond-shaped fontanelle. The posterior fontanelle is back here at the back. That's right at the occiput, and it's triangular and much smaller. Okay, so if we're in between, if the space in between, so right in here on our baby is what's presenting, that's vertex. Now, to make things confusing, you will hear people talk about vertex presentation as basically all cephalic, all head presentations that aren't face first. So don't get confused by that. Okay, occiput right there, vertex is between the anterior and posterior fontanelles. Bregma is when the anterior fontanelle is presenting first. So this is what's coming through first. So if we look at the back of the head, we've got a smaller diameter. Okay, if we extend this head so that the anterior fontanelle is coming first, we've got a bigger diameter. Okay, that gets harder to deliver. That's bregma. What if we extend it a little more and the brow is coming first? Now we've got a much wider diameter, so we may have a hard time getting through, but also you're pushing the baby against this extended head, and so we can have more extension and actually cause some cervical spine damage. Mentum is when the chin is trying to come first, so this is a face presentation. Okay, what do you think could be some of the risk of face presentation? We're shoving, see all the stress on the neck. That's a danger, but also all the pressure of the cervix on this face and neck can cause swelling. So babies with face presentation need to be monitored for neuro injuries, but they also need to be monitored for swelling that can interfere with the airway. Okay, so mentum is chin. We're talking about what comes first. Mentum is chin, also called face presentation. Sinciput is brow. Okay, so the brow line. Bregma is the anterior fontanelle. Vertex is between the anterior and posterior. Occiput is way back at the back, just under that posterior fontanelle. Okay, so if I have the chin coming first, I'm going here, the chin is pointing at the left side anterior. So this is left mentum anterior, LMA. All right. So I want you to practice those. We're going to practice them some more in class. The next thing I want to look at is breech. We remember breech can be complete, frank, or footling. Let's look at some complete breeches. Okay. That's going toward the right side anterior, right? Okay, so transverse, this is not happening. Now, we can also have a compound presentation, and that's when more than one presenting part. So we might have a head, but we also might have a hand that's up here trying to deliver with the head. That's going to make that diameter wider. It may be a little bit more difficult to get through. Also, we may have more trauma for that mom, more physical trauma. All right, so that's, sorry, really dry. That's the passenger piece. All right. I want you to spend some time with this information because in class, we're going to talk about different presentations. Next, we're going to talk about the pelvis.